What's up, YouTube? It's you again, Coach White Belt, and today I'm going to be talking about wrestling and judo for jiu-jitsu. So, one of the kids that I train, and I've talked about her in the past, I want to say she's 8 years old now. She might be 9. Well, anyway, she practices wrestling, she competes in wrestling. Um, she is a gray belt in jiu-jitsu, and she has gone to judo a number of times, but she trains wrestling 5 days a week and trains jiu-jitsu about 5 days a week, and she trains in karate as well. She's an orange belt in karate. She's been doing it for like 5 years or something, 5 or 6 years, and she's pretty good at all of them. She places in pretty much everything. She has the whole room of karate trophies, and she's got a bunch of jiu-jitsu medals. She competes at Worlds and Pan Ams and Dream, and I went to a competition of hers at Dream where she placed second. I was coaching her for that tournament, and one of the things that I focused on the most for that match, because I had watched some of her older matches, and I had gone to one of her tournaments before that. Was I was working on her judo. So she doesn't go to judo all that much. She has gone to judo, where I train. But she has pretty good wrestling, especially a lot better than most of her competitors in jiu-jitsu. A lot of them don't train outside of jiu-jitsu, you know. These are kids who are raised to train and compete in jiu-jitsu to win jiu-jitsu competitions. And she's not all that different, you know. She trains hard, and her parents want her to succeed in martial arts and to succeed at competition. And so she does do really well at karate. She does do really well at wrestling. She does well at jiu-jitsu. So one of the things that I noticed was that the other girls who are on the podium are usually taller than her, and have a reach advantage on her. And another thing is, of course, that her wrestling is a lot better than theirs, but she has a hard time getting into her shot, to go in for a double, to go in for a single, to get a good tie-up, to try to work her wrestling against these kids, especially since a lot of them pull guard because they're not specifically good at takedowns where she is. And so when they already know that, they compete against each other all the time at all the same tournaments, and they know that she's good at wrestling, so they don't even try, and they find their grips, they pull them, and they pull guard. And when they're on the feet, she tries to get a takedown. And so I noticed that, you know, when I noticed that she was having some trouble getting her shots, then I wanted her to focus a lot on judo. And I didn't want to overcomplicate it. I'm not the best judoka either. I just wanted to give her the basic concept of when someone is pulling, you can take them in that direction. You can go for ouchigari, kochigari, or sotogari, and, you know, a million other techniques. But basically trip them backwards as they're trying to pull. Because a lot of kids play this like push and pull game. And when they do that, if they're pulling, then it's easy enough to take them backward if your timing is there, if your footwork is there, if your balance is there. And if they're pushing into you, then it's easy enough to turn and throw them with soinage or taiotoshi or ogoshi, or depending on what grips you have, right? So I worked on this a few times with her, and we've seen some success. And I would say that this is important. Practicing judo is important for jiu-jitsu competitors who compete in the gi, because I should have specified she competes in the gi specifically. She does jiu-jitsu no gi and gi, of course, when she trains, but when she competes in the gi. And so that was the trouble I noticed, and that's how I tried to help her get around it. And when I had my first jiu-jitsu tournament, and the videos are up here on my channel on YouTube, you can go watch them. I was competing in the gi, which was not something I regularly did. We didn't even, I don't know if I think we had just started doing a gi class for the adults at PG at that time. So there was a gi class a long time ago, and then not enough people were showing up. Everybody showed up to no gi, and so it was just a bunch of no gi. And then we started doing gi class for the kids, and then eventually we had a gi class for the adults as well, which is only 1 day a week. So not a whole lot, but I had jumped into judo for a little while. At that point, I had been training judo for about 6 months or so, and I felt like I had a pretty good hip throw. I felt like I had a pretty good inside trip, outside trip, and such. When I was sparring with my partners over at jiu-jitsu, I felt like, I'm developing my throws. I'm definitely feeling better about my throws. But then I went to judo class, and even the white belts were real trouble. Even some of the smaller white belts. But I noticed that, after once we got on the ground, I was able to hold my own. But after a while of training at judo, um, and developing my technique and developing my footwork and developing my timing, um, it became a lot easier, and even more so when I went to jiu-jitsu class, because a lot of people at jiu-jitsu over at PG have wrestling experience. A lot of them, especially more than I've got, and especially back then. This was maybe a year and some change into jiu-jitsu, and only a few months into judo, that I was able to find a lot more success in my throws, where instead of where back in the day I would go for an arm drag to try to get to their back, I would bait them in by grabbing a wrist, going for the arm drag, and then waiting for them to use it as their own arm drag to get behind me, where eventually I'd throw them. And that was because I had developed enough confidence in my skill to throw somebody with Soenage. Um, and so I noticed that my judo had really improved my jiu-jitsu in terms of throws. And so I wanted to share this with one of my jiu-jitsu kids who was having some trouble with implementing her wrestling. And when I had my tournament, in my first match, it went into overtime. I was playing really safe. Um, um, and I went for Tayotoshi, and the guy stepped over my foot, and I just stood back up. I was able to get back up to my feet right away without a problem. And then I noticed when we were both starting to pull, I could sense he was a little frustrated and I was a little frustrated, because neither of us had gotten anything done in the first few minutes of the match. I don't even remember how long the matches were. They could have been 5 minutes, they could have been 10 minutes. I'd have to go back and look, but they were a few minutes long, and a few minutes were already gone by, and neither of us had scored anything. And so we both started to, I started to try to pull and push and try to get him to do the same. And so eventually I felt him pull on me, and I was like, all right, now is my chance. And so I stepped in with Ochigari, and I got him down, and I got the points for the takedown. And then I was trying to pass his guard. He was trying to stop me. He tried to get me in a triangle. And then the match was over, and I won because of that takedown. And then my second match, it went into overtime, because again, I was playing a pretty safe game. I was not in any danger in that match, but it went into overtime, and then I did sort of the same thing. I sort of angled against him and to try to bait him to go for something so I could slam him backwards, and I figured if he doesn't do anything about it and he just keeps circling around me, I'm just going to throw him. So I turned, he did nothing, and then I went for Tayotoshi and I threw him in overtime, and I won in overtime because of that. My third match, my third match was rough. So it was against a D1 wrestler from, I'm going to say it's UC Bakersfield. And the guy's good. The guy was good. The guy was strong. He actually trains with another kid that I used to train. One of the obviously this guy's not a kid. He's an adult, but he trains at the same gym as one of the kids who I used to train. But yeah, I didn't know that he was that high level wrestler, that high of a level. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know who any of the guys I was competing against were. So I just went in, put my name down, and then I didn't even see the other people's names. I was just like, whenever they called me up, I was like, oh, okay, so this is the guy I'm going against. Okay. But I didn't know that this guy was a high level wrestler, and had I been, I would have maybe have been a little bit wiser and try to keep my legs away from him a little bit more. Maybe try to bait him into a shot so that I could work my judo or something, or use the gi to stuff him a little bit more. But I hadn't known that, and eventually he was practically in mount. He was trying to pass. I was trying to use my lockdown. He was eventually slipping out of it. Got all the way to mount, and I figured, okay, well, he's gonna go for the Americana right away, and I'm gonna hold my hands together and turn, and he's gonna go for the armbar, and I'm gonna try to hitchhike. And so I tried it, and I tried to hitchhike, and there was no getting out of that thing, and it was tight, and it came on fast, and I just tapped. So I placed second at that tournament, but my success really in that time, well, the reason I didn't get destroyed on the ground was, of course, because my jiu-jitsu game had really developed compared to when I started. But the reason I was able to win was because of was the instances in which you had used my improved judo. And I spoke to the guy that I competed against first, my first match. I don't remember. I didn't even get his name. I just remember him as the Asian guy with the black storm kimono. And if you know him, and if you trained with him, or if you're out there, man, hit me up. I'd like to train with you. But I asked him if you practice judo, and he said no. And then he asked me, and I said yeah, and he's like, yeah, I can tell. And I asked him because he tried for a few throws on me, and they were not at the level of the guys obviously at the judo club, but they obviously were not new to him. They were the techniques he tried because they were the techniques he knew. And he said that at his gym they train quite a bit of throws. So they're not a guard pulling gym, and neither are we, of course. Primarily, it's a wrestling gym, but my judo definitely helped me out because I was competing in the gi. But I would say if you're gonna compete without the gi, if you're gonna do a no gi tournament, then definitely wrestling would be where it's at, because you don't have those grips, and in wrestling it's so hard to take somebody down, to hold on to them when they're just trying to run. If they're not wearing a gi, it's really hard to, especially when there's just like short sleeve rash guards, and especially like in a competition, if they allow it for a guy to be shirtless, it's really difficult to hold on to them. And if you practice in the gi all the time, you're used to the grips, you're used to the friction. It's so different. And learning a bit of wrestling, I would say, will go a long way, a really, really long way for that sort of scenario. I mean, wrestling is important for a million reasons, but in terms of no-gi jiu-jitsu competition, I would say it's invaluable for sure. Um, there are a few wrestling techniques I feel like I've gotten pretty good at over time, um, and one is I like to bait the snap down so that the guy tries to lift himself up, and then I go to shoot in for my double, and the other is the low single, because especially against the guys who have some wrestling experience, some of the guys at jiu-jitsu class were high school wrestlers, some of them were college wrestlers, so against them, they've got years of wrestling on me. So I'm not going to be able to go in and shoot a single or shoot a double on them, because they're going to get me. They're going to sprawl on me, they're going to flatten me out, and it's going to turn into a nightmare for me. And so instead of going for a regular outside single, sweep single, or high crotch, or a double leg, or even trying to go for a duck under, or really like 99% of wrestling moves I wouldn't be able to pull off on them, but the ones that do work for me are like the low single. The low single works for me. And I think it's because maybe they don't expect it, or maybe because it's a little bit easier to reach, and because it doesn't I'm putting myself in a position where the sprawl, as long as I can get a hold of the Achilles or the back of the heel, then the sprawl is not really there. So there are definitely some wrestling moves that work out for me, and this is true in judo as well. You can argue that the best antidote against the best weapon against a judoka is good wrestling. And of course, this is not true for judo competition, because nowadays they don't allow attacks to the legs with the hands. You can't go for a single or go for a double. But in terms of just a sort of no rules grappling match, if you're going against somebody who's pretty good at judo, that being good at wrestling is a very good weapon. And I would say that's true in some ways, that you can use your wrestling knowledge, your wrestling advantage, your expertise in singles and doubles, to shoot in on somebody who is maybe not so experienced in those areas. But at the same time, when I go against the guys who are better wrestlers than I am, I try not to use my wrestling unless I go for, like I said, my low single. But aside of that, I don't. I use my judo, and it works out well for me in many cases, because I try to get to a clinch position, because in freestyle and in folk style, of course, you obviously do have clinching, but a lot of the attacks are on the legs, and a lot of the fight happens on the ground. You don't spend a ton of time in the clinch position, and you still do. You still spend a lot of time in the clinch position, but many people are not going for throws. Throws are obviously very common in Greco-Roman wrestling, because it's like no-gi judo. You're not allowed to grab the legs, but you don't run into a lot of Greco guys nowadays, or at least I don't. So against these other guys who train in freestyle and train in folk style, I have at least an advantage in throws. Not an advantage in single legs, not an advantage in double legs or duck unders, but an advantage in throws. And so that's sort of what I go for, because I know that that's my best avenue for trying to take them down. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if I were to try to shoot a single or a double on them, I'd get smushed. So you could, just like you can argue that the best weapon against a good judoka is good wrestling, I would say that the same is true. You obviously can't be ignorant of wrestling. If you are ignorant of wrestling, you try to grapple against a wrestler and you're a judoka, you're in for a surprise. Unless you, of course, came from sort of older days of judo where you could do singles and doubles and everything else. But if you're a judoka who specifically practices throws only, then, man, when I saw that D1 wrestler shoot in for the sweep single, I was like, man, that was the fastest sweep single that anybody's ever shot on me, ever. Because of course in training, people are playful, people are not so aggressive. This was a tournament, and this was for first place, and the guy was a D1 wrestler, so I'd never seen somebody shoot in for a sweep single that hard. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh no, this guy's a good wrestler. But it was a fun time. It was a great time. I really, really, really had fun that tournament. Even in that match, I was really tested, and I was really motivated to take up more wrestling after that. But yeah, I would say my judo is what I rely on against wrestlers, and my bit of wrestling knowledge is sort of what I rely on against the judo guys, because they're better at judo than I am. So I have to have something else. Of course, I can't go for my singles and doubles, but I do use other just sort of concepts of wrestling to try to get to someone's back, or to try to control someone's arm, to go for a Russian 2-on-1, or to go for a lateral drop, because a lot of judo guys don't see that coming. I use my overhooks and underhooks, my collar ties a lot, even though judo is a game of using the gi to move somebody around, you know, what they call kuzushi, to off balance someone before you throw them to make it easier. I try to use my overhooks, underhooks, and collar ties a lot against judo guys, and I would say that that benefits, you know, me and myself and my training partners, because then my judo training partners who maybe are not exposed to that will get a little bit of exposure to it, even if it is coming from me, you know, being a low level wrestler. They do at least get to experience a little bit of it, and then, you know, it helps them to improve their game as well. But one thing that I will say is true of both judo practitioners and wrestlers is the top pressure, the top game is incredible. And man, when I've had my jiu-jitsu sparring sessions against good wrestlers, and when the same thing against judo players, before I got, you know, better at takedown defense and better at my own takedowns, was that when they got on top, there was like nothing I could do about it. I couldn't stop them from passing guard, even though I wasn't my guard retention wasn't, you know, horrible. I mean, relative, right? You ask a world level, a world class black belt, and everybody's guard is garbage. But you know, compared to the other guys I spar with, I felt like I was getting pretty good, and against a good wrestler, nothing I could do about it. I couldn't escape from the bottom worth anything. And then I went to judo, and my first month there, it was the same way, that everybody could just pass my guard, and I couldn't pass anybody's guard. And once they got into position, they got into side control, or got into kesagatame, which is a head and arm or headlock position. There was nothing I could do. I just couldn't get out. I couldn't sweep them. I couldn't get back to guard. I couldn't do anything. And after training judo for a while, and then later jumping into wrestling now and again, my top game really developed. And then I had a sparring session with a training partner of mine, Brian Meyer. Brian, if you're watching this, I doubt you'll see this, but in the event, miss training with you, man. I'll get back in the gym soon. But Brian Meyer, he got his blue belt, I want to say a year before I did or so. Just about a year before I did. But he's taller than me, thinner than me. We were close to the same weight some time ago. I'm a little bit heavier than he is now, maybe 10 pounds or so more than he is. Or I would say at the last time that we sparred, we were pretty much the same weight. And nowadays, I'm maybe 10 or 15 pounds heavier than him. But the last time we sparred, so I got my blue belt, you know, a few months ago, and he got his blue belt a year before I did, but he got pretty busy, and he wasn't coming into the gym as much as I was at the time, and so I was really able to catch up and improve while he was unable to. And so we ran into each other again. He came in, and we stayed after class to spar quite a lot, he and I. And I was able to do work my judo on him. And he's not a wrestler, but you know, he's not ignorant of takedowns, and of course, being from PG, you know, he works a lot on his takedowns, and he works a lot on his guard, just like I do, because he's one of the smaller guys in the gym, just like me, and so he gets put on his back a lot, and so his guard is pretty good. And I was in top position, but I was in the guard, and I was trying to pass the guard. But one thing that I like to do is I actually like to work half guard. I like to play half guard on the bottom and on the top, specifically on the top. I was working from the top guard position, and I was able to move into half guard. He was using his lockdown, and I punch choked him. And immediately after, he was complimenting me on my top pressure, and that was something that I didn't know that I was sort of waiting for, that it would be such a big deal to me to receive some acknowledgement that my top game had gotten better, that my top pressure had gotten better, and it's not like I kicked his butt, man. He um what did he catch me in? I'm gonna say he caught me in a vaporizer in one of the sessions, and I want to say he armbarred me sometime later. So he caught me. Um, it's not like I'm talking about kicking my training partner's butt, because that's definitely what happened. It was a good back and forth, but one thing that I definitely lacked earlier on was my top game, and in that moment he complimented me on my top game and my top pressure, and then I told him, yeah, I've been training judo for a little over a year now, and he's like, yeah, man, I can tell. It's definitely that year at judo that's it helped you improve, because at that time I hadn't jumped into wrestling a whole lot, and I did a little bit more after that, but at that time, um, yeah, it was really my experience at judo and getting used to sparring with my judo partners, because the game of judo is very similar to the game of wrestling. That you try to take somebody down as hard as it, like, try as hard as you can to get somebody down, because in judo, if you throw them and they land flat on their back, you win. And in wrestling, of course, you score, and if they fall on their back, then of course, if you can pin them, you pin them and you win. And if not, then they're going to turn to their stomach, which will happen in judo as well. If you don't throw them on their back, they're going to go to their stomach, so that you don't roll them over and pin them. And then the difference is that in judo, if you end up in the guard, then you try to pass guard, and then you try to get to a pin position, side control or mount or head and arm. But in wrestling, you don't do this, because people don't lay on their back, because in guard, that would still be a pin. In wrestling, the guard would still be a pin, so people don't play guard in wrestling. But one thing that's true about both wrestlers and judoka is that they have incredible balance. I've tried sweeping both of them, and as hard as it might be to take them down, I would say trying for the takedown is worth it, because sweeping them, I would say, is even harder, because they have really, really good balance. And so that was something that developed for me as well over time. So yeah, whether you're competing in jiu-jitsu in the gi, or you're competing in jiu-jitsu in no gi, um, either one of them will help you a lot. Judo and wrestling would help a ton, even if it's not a ton of experience. Even if it's just like 3 months or 6 months, your takedowns and your top game will become that much better, immensely better. And I would say, if you want to be specific, if you're gonna train, if you're gonna compete in the gi, then practicing at a judo club would help a ton, because of the fact that there are grips, and especially if you practice at an old school judo place where they still do leg attacks, where they still do singles and doubles, because then you'll still at least get some of that experience. And if you're practicing no-gi, then or if you're competing in no-gi, then wrestling, I would say, is a really good addition, because you're under the same sort of scenario where there are no grips. Your only grips are the ones you create. Your wrist, the holding the wrist, or grabbing a collar tie, or using an overhook or an underhook. So they're really undervalued tools. The ability to take somebody down and create top pressure like nobody else. And if you've ever competed against a good wrestler, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. That you could be pretty good at jiu-jitsu, and then go against somebody who wrestled in high school for a year or two and been impressed. So if you've ever been thinking about it, or you're just trying to figure out what to add to your game, and you've been doing jiu-jitsu for a little while, or if your kid is sort of on this in this scenario, this troubleshooting stage, where what is it that I can improve? Because improving at jiu-jitsu is very incremental. It's very slow. It's true about everything else as well. But Like if you're wrestling to compete in wrestling, then it seems very incremental. Just like in jiu-jitsu, it takes years. You know, it'll take 6 months before you're like, man, I really feel like I've improved compared to 6 months ago. But I'll tell you, if you add 3 or 6 months of judo or wrestling to your jiu-jitsu game, you're gonna see a huge difference, I think. Even in just those few months of judo at the beginning, you know, I wouldn't have won any of, or I wouldn't have done as well at my jiu-jitsu tournament had I not gone to judo. And I definitely wouldn't have seen as much progress in my last 6 months of training as I have seen if I hadn't been going to wrestling class. So I would say the same thing for judo guys. I definitely hold my own on the ground against a lot of the judo guys, and it's because I've been practicing jiu-jitsu as long as I have. As far as submissions, because in judo the name of the game is still like wrestling, roll them over and pin them, and a lot of judoka focus on that, and I don't. When I see somebody in turtle position at judo, I try to catch him in a crucifix and I try to choke him, or I try to put him in a clock choke or a loop choke, or I try to do like an over the back kimura or over the back kimura to the arm bar. Like I try all my what looks to them crazy stuff from jiu-jitsu and what at PG is considered just normal attacks on the ground. But yeah, if you're looking to improve your game, just jump into something else for a few months, or just add it. You know, if you have the time to do both, do both. But if not, then dedicate a day or two out of the week for something else that's gonna help. And I don't think you'll regret it. It made a big difference for me, huge difference, which is the only reason I'm making a video about it, and I really recommend it to anybody else. So, I've been rambling long enough. Doubt anybody's gonna watch this anyway. But if you watch this, let me know what you think. Like, share, comment, whatever. And I respond to comments, so it's not like I get many of them. But thanks for listening. I'll catch you guys hopefully sooner than later. I know it's been a while since my last video, but I'll get back on it. So, see you guys at the gym.